Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Holden's 11. I got a great guest tonight, and I can't wait to talk to him. Please welcome Shaun Barbour.
Hey, how's it going, man? Thanks for having me on. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, Shaun, I got to be honest, I'm excited to talk to you. I've really been looking forward to this. And we got a great topic tonight, something that we're both passionate about, cryptids.
Absolutely. They're so much fun, and it's kind of neat to entertain the idea of these, I don't know, these creatures or these beings or these others, if you will, existing simultaneously around us that maybe some of us just get the chance to see or even learn about.
Right. And we're going to talk about that. And of course, I'm excited to hear about your new project. You are a writer, a creator, an inker, and the new book is called I Drive for Cerber.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's basically Uber for the paranormal. So it dives right in there along with the topic of the cryptid. So it kind of worked out really well, which is why I'm really excited.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing about that too. So, normally when we make these lists, they have a couple of rules that go with them. And for the cryptid list, there really aren't any rules necessarily, because the nature of cryptids, they kind of defy rules to begin with.
Yeah.
But I will say we're going to focus on stuff from about 1900 on, because you could make a pretty good point that cryptids have been around for so long, indigenous peoples, prehistoric times. There's been mythical creatures going back to the dawn of time, if you wanted to go that far. So we're going to talk about, it's basically 1900 forward for the purposes of our list.
Right on. It narrows it down. Like you said, there's so many out there, and
right.
Messes with the classifications of them and everything else.
We're going to focus on some of the big ones, and I can't wait to share this with the viewers, and hopefully they will chime in and share their thoughts as well. Without further ado, let's launch right in. Number 11, this is from 1952, the Flatwoods Monster. Now that's one, of course, from West Virginia. I notice West Virginia seems to turn up a lot on cryptid lists.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. There's a few places like California is also another one where a bunch of them pop up. So it seems to be like the clusters of them. So I wonder if that has anything to do with like the discoverability of them, whether they kind of hone in on certain areas.
Right. And, there's a little bit of bleed over too between UFO sightings and cryptids. And, hopefully we can talk about that a little bit in the way that they might be connected. What's your thoughts on the possible connection between UFO sightings and cryptid encounters?
I think it's pretty valid. I mean, everybody has heard about like the gray man and different stuff like that, but it's like, if there's one type of alien, why wouldn't there be many different kinds? And so that's why like the Flatwoods Monster and the description that it got and everything is kind of really intriguing, because you on initial impact of hearing about the story, you kind of go, well, that's not what I'm used to. But if you open up the doorway or the doorway to one possibility, they say there's one type, why wouldn't there be many types with many different characteristics?
Right, particularly, and not to get too far out, but if the universe is indeed infinite, well, not only are aliens and cryptids a possibility, but a likelihood.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
It's almost more likely, it would almost be impossible that there wouldn't be some other type of creature out there. And this one, the thing I love about the Flatwoods Monster is the design and the way he looks. And like I say, that was from 1952. That's in Braxton County, and a pretty well documented encounter, right? There was police reports, and there's a lot of that went into this sighting. And it's one of the weirdest looking ones. Like, he's got kind of the hood and the red eyes, and one of the scarier creatures, and allegedly sighted at the same time as a spat of UFO sightings in the area.
Yeah, I think that was kind of cool. I wonder if, like you said, like the hood shape or whatever, the spade shape that they kind of interpreted, if it was like a hood or something, like maybe the lighting was off or something. So the possibility of that being whatever their spacesuit or whatever.
Yeah, exactly, man. A spacesuit or some kind of interdimensional apparatus, right?
For sure.
I read a book a number of years ago about cryptids, and the guy was making the point that the cryptids are maybe not necessarily extraterrestrial, but extra dimensional, like they were actually from another dimension, which I thought was kind of interesting take on that. You have any thoughts on the other dimensional theory?
I really, there's too much deja vu and unexplained stuff out there for me to dismiss that. I mean, I've even entertained the thought of the possibility that our dreams are just glimpses into like what's happening in another dimension or something, like another version
Sure.
of ourselves.
Yeah, fascinating, fascinating. Well, and to link them kind of together, there's another one that accompanied a UFO sighting. This one is the Hopkinsville Goblins. That's from 1955. Sometimes it's called the Kelly Hopkinsville incident. And this is
Yeah.
the one where it was a family, right? And they were in a farmhouse, and it was 5 adults and 7 children. Again, very well documented because they called the police and everything, and essentially had a gunfight over the course of several hours with these small goblin-like creatures. And allegedly, again, happened during the course of a rash of UFO sightings in the
I was gonna
area.
say, didn't it happen over like a 3-day time span? It was just
I
like
think it was,
a
yeah.
cluster event. And it
Yeah,
was really
and
cool to hear like that one. What they accounted, like the one was coming down from the ceiling and grabbing the guy, and
right, yeah.
yeah, so that one, no, it's really cool to see how much interactivity, and not just that there was just one, but a whole group of them kind of like scattered all about, and they weren't these big imposing like creatures or aliens or anything, but
They were
they
little.
were rather small. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll share some graphics with the viewers as we go through this to help nudge your memory, because most of us know some of these creatures, and of course they've turned up in the course of popular movies over the years and things. And supposedly this is where they started using the term little green men.
Yeah,
Because
no, it's kind of cool. I love the design of these ones just because I think they're super fun. And
yeah,
when I was looking at them, I was seeing some of the recommendations how maybe they inspired one of the Pokemon designs, which is kind of a fun little idea.
right, and a little bit almost like the Gremlins in a way too, because
Yeah.
didn't they have sort of like these weird ears that were sort of gremlin-like, I always thought.
Yeah, the bulbous heads but pointed ears and
Right.
on these spindly bodies. Yeah.
And by the way, that was in Kentucky, right? So you're not talking about people that are necessarily inclined to be familiar with aliens and UFOs and things. It was a little bit like I don't mean this in an insulting way, but sort of a backwoods rural
Right.
farm community. And
Yeah.
it's when you talk about a group of people all seeing something, and of course they were shooting at these beings. It wasn't like, oh, we just saw it. Like you said, it was over several days and there was gunfire exchanged.
Yeah, really active. It's kind of a cool thing. Like I said, it heightened the story like when I was looking into it for me because of the interactivity between the creatures and the people, where it was just more than a sighting or just something that was real quick that somebody was like, what? But a whole interaction that was around these sightings, which was super rad.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one and kind of has lived on over the years. When we talked about the cryptids and stuff, and of course you had some great suggestions too, that some of them have sort of permeated the cultural consciousness, right? And this is going to bring us to our number 9, Slenderman.
Yeah, Slenderman's a lot of fun, and to me, I think it's maybe a debatable one because a lot of people will go with what about the fact that it's started or its awareness started out as a story,
Creepy
but
pasta.
with the existence of, like, say, if you entertain the multidimensional stuff, if you entertain the mass universe, why not entertain the fact that maybe as a whole group, like humans as a being, may have enough power as a group entity to put forward with the power of their belief and kind of emanate and create these things. So the inspiration behind some of these creatures is really fun, and the influence that they have on real people, like Slenderman did,
Right.
kind of breeds its life into it.
Right. And man, that's a great way to put it, Sean. I will tell you that when you talk about something that influences popular consciousness, it's exactly like you said, there's something to it. Things don't happen in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
And of course, in this case, there was even a grisly murder case with the 2 young girls, the Slenderman murders, who were, admittedly, there's some mental illness going on.
Yeah.
But like you said, where does this conceptually, where did it start? This all comes from somewhere. And when you talk about this cultural consciousness, what influenced it that began this sort of unusual encounter, I guess we'd say.
Well, I know that the stories popularized themselves through Reddit streams and
Right.
4chan early on.
Yeah.
And so the exposure to that and the appeal of a short story, I think, made it accessible for different age groups. And so multiple different people of all kinds of ages, all kinds of beliefs were having access to this. And I think sometimes through being influential or just the solidification of an idea or a character that just implants in our minds, maybe there's something there that says, hey, this triggers that very primal part of our brain that has this natural fear of certain things. So
right.
maybe it originated from somewhere, and maybe it's a type of thing. So not naming it, but it is Slenderman, the characteristics that we give it. That's how we classify and name everything else, that this happened as well.
Yeah, and by the way, it's a great point, right? Like you're kind of butting up against the concept that maybe there was something already in the consciousness, and only it was the naming that awakened it.
Yeah, it's kind of like how to explain maybe, you know, how people are afraid of snakes that maybe are never around them, but they have this deathly, you know, they're super afraid of snakes. There's something in there based on the exposure and the lineage that we have, maybe in the type of country that we live in, or our surroundings, our community, that influence the way that our body's response mechanisms like fear and joy and sadness,
Right.
Those very base, and we don't understand it, but we walk outside and we feel something.
Yeah.
What is that? You know what I mean?
That's a great point. That's a great way to look at it. And I think when you talk about the psychological terror that is that it awakens in the mind, it kind of leads us into our number 8, okay, which we're going back. This is for 1967 and returning to West Virginia. Of course, I'm talking about the Mothman, right? And first of all, what are your thoughts on the Mothman?
Mothman is super cool, just for the simple fact that the presence of this cryptid and the stories and stuff that surround it affected the community so much that the community itself, where the sightings were happening, erected a statue in its honor.
Right.
So when you're left with like regular drawings or sketches or different things to kind of use for reference, this whole community agreed like this is what it looks like. Right. But there's also that similar debatability that seems to be reoccurring, like say even with the Hopkinsville Goblins, that it could have been an owl. So an owl always seems to be popping up amongst, you know, multiple of these cryptid sightings, in the fact that like the way that it was standing. But again, that's a really big owl.
Right, exactly. And there was a pretty cool movie made from, by any chance, did you ever see the Mothman Prophecies?
I have not seen that, actually.
It's not really like a horror movie. It's sort of like a suspenseful psychological thriller, and it's filled with weird memory concepts and this kind of thing. And it's sort of, I think what they were trying to convey was that there was a sense of psychological terror that people got from their exposure to the Mothman phenomenon. And like, if you remember, he even showed up around, like there was a terrible bridge accident, right? And they had seen him the night before that. And there was also another thing, I guess he was hovering around. It was if I'm not mistaken, it was a munitions plant for the army, and there was like weapons and bombs and things, and he kept turning up around there, like interrupting the guard duty and things. And
it's kind of a cool little incident, like what the drive is to go towards some of these industrial buildings. They're large, they have lots of places they can get away, it's a shelter, like a cave that maybe there's parts of it that aren't accessible or start when they're running down, or maybe the boom of like the wartime. And so they had to erect these munitions type buildings, and then they got vacated when the war was over, left these freestanding structures that house openly, whether it's people trying to get away out of the weather or whatever. But it's very, I think it's a valid thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because Mothman is one of my favorites too, and not only because of his cool design, you mentioned the
Yeah.
statue, but also I love the fact that he kind of brings this psychological terror with him. Like even the people that saw him, they said things like, because he wasn't necessarily on the attack, he wasn't grabbing
Yeah.
people and snatching them up, but the people were like filled with fear after seeing this weird creature with these red burning eyes, right? And
Yeah.
it was really sort of a, I guess what we'd call a psychological phenomenon. And he was kind of on his own. I mean, there was a few UFO sightings potentially linked to the Mothman, but largely he was on his own.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's why it's a lot of fun. Like, just like where, like, I would say different cultural backgrounds originated in certain areas. We go back to that idea where some of these cryptids populated certain parts of the country, which is
Yeah.
just a really fun idea to think that's just where they are, and maybe there was something to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I guess to some extent, and like I say, we're focusing mostly on the ones from 1900 forward, and we're focusing on some of the scarier ones. But even in some of the books that I've been reading, and especially to get ready for this topic, which I'm very enthusiastic about, you know, you look back and even through indigenous peoples, they were familiar with these creatures and they were kind of less afraid of them than we are. Like they knew they were more like
Yeah,
respected, and I don't want to say worshipped quite exactly, but like you talk
yeah,
about the thunderbird and the rock and some of the Native American creatures, which you and I would probably call cryptids. And like in our case, we hear about these things and they're what you and I would call monsters, right? But in
yeah,
their
yeah.
case, it was more like, I wouldn't say they were quite gods to them exactly. That's probably not the right way to put it, but they weren't really afraid of them either.
Well, I think to me that would explain like their openness to it, is because they spent less time trying to explain things away and more time just accepting it as part of their surroundings, saying this is out
Experiencing
there,
it.
this is what it was. I saw it, here's what it was. And it was just kind of, accepted if it was more than one person or something, and then it became part of that if it became multiple sightings, and they just adapted it into their beliefs. Where I think as people today, we have so much access to so much information and we create our own excuses for things that we just explain away things. We actually convince ourselves that maybe things don't exist because it's an owl or something else.
Right, right. Well, there's a great line from a movie, and by the way, it's from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
a great movie, right? And it's on Amazon Prime. I just watched it the other day. But the great line is the guy's saying something to the effect: the Air Force colonel is telling everybody, "Hey, this stuff's fake. If it's been all around the world, these unidentified flying objects, how come nobody has ever taken a good photograph of one?" And a fella stands up and he goes, "Hold on a second." He said, "I've been a news reporter for 21 years, and we've never taken a picture of a plane crash as it happened." And he's,
Yeah.
oh, okay, good point. You know, there's something to that. So some things just by their brevity or maybe where it's happening, it's difficult to get photographic or film evidence of it.
Yeah, it's so much easier to get like the effect of something rather than the actual thing and
Yeah.
create the story because our minds are wild.
Yeah. And it also, like we touched on earlier, your point was, and I thought it was a good one, maybe we're all kind of linked together by this psychic consciousness, right? And it would kind of explain why, like, for example, like the Mothman, why does his legend live on? Heck, it's 60 years later, of course, and people are still talking about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, just the popularity of cryptozoology in general, the fact that it still breeds more people getting into it. You do have people like getting into not only the older ones, but actually discovering newer ones, or,
Newer ones
you
too, yeah.
know, as we discover new things, seeing how they kind of tie in to what's going on in the area or what the possibilities are.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to move into a slightly more modern one. This is number 7, the Dover Demon from Dover, Massachusetts. The sighting was April 21st, 1977. And this was a younger fellow that claimed he saw it too. And he drew a great rendition of the creature that he claims he saw. And the main thing that strikes me about the Dover Demon, and by the way, I want to get your opinions about this, Shaun, because a lot of people claim this one was a hoax. And, you know, there's varying degrees of hoaxes throughout the cryptid lore.
Oh, sure.
But you know, this fella up till for years, he claimed, no, look, I saw this thing. He wasn't trying to make money. In those days, there was no YouTube, no Instagram for him to, like, he wasn't trying to get rich by claiming he saw this thing.
Well, yeah,
And
they didn't have social media
right,
we do.
yeah, like today, maybe we'd be more inclined to say, well, that guy is just trying to get clicks, you know, or whatever.
Well,
But back then, people would have thought you were a kook for saying something like this. And he struck me as being a very credible witness. What's your thoughts on that one?
yeah, no, I think we have to give a little bit of credibility to people that have these experiences and are so convinced and don't have any history of mental illness. They're not known to be people that are storytellers or huge alcoholics or anything else like that. There's just something to it. And even that goes back to the one we already talked about, the Hopkinsville Goblins.
Yeah.
That their house became an attraction once that all happened. They didn't want anything to do with it. They just reported what happened. So the young man that actually reported these, he didn't want nothing to do with it either. And so to say, no, this is just what I saw, I'm not interested in this part, I'm just interested in telling you my truth. Right. That's a big deal. And the fact that it doesn't continue, they don't show anything in the future as time moves on either.
Right. Yeah. And they didn't have any other wacky stories to come from. And one of the things about the Dover Demon, and this is just one man's opinion, this is my opinion, he looked very much like an extraterrestrial, what you and I would call a gray. And right. So it's just when people talk about the grays, they're always like standing up and everything else. But I think if you were to crouch them down a little bit more in a defensive position, what is it? And they were usually found along like a roadway and a waterway. They were always it was like scurrying alongside the road. And like you said, he was kind of almost on all fours. But you know, if he would have been standing up straight with his arms out, he could have passed for an alien gray. He had the sort of elongated head and the eye shape that, you know, you and I would have called a extraterrestrial head. Who's to say it wasn't like a castaway or something, maybe like a violator of whatever kind of standards that the grays have. And just like humans, if you cast them out into the wild, they'll gain more primal awareness and react and respond in different ways. So maybe this could lend itself to being a primal gray that got cast out. Wow, Shaun, I love your theory there, man. And I tell you, it makes me want to write a story about it, the feral gray. Yeah, I think it'd be a lot of fun. I think it's a cool thing. That's a good one. Yeah, you think like a writer, man. I can tell. So I got a good one here for number 6. And as we go on, we're going to talk a little bit too. I'm fascinated by cryptids, as you can tell, and I know you are too. And as we were saying earlier, there is what I call a varying degree of possible hoaxes on some of these, but some kind of lend themselves to potentially being real. And what I mean by this, it's easy to say things like, well, all the species now have been discovered, you know, science is so advanced and, you know, we know what we're doing. We're such capable analysts of our environment. There are no new things to be discovered. But if you look back at recent history, like I said, from 1900 on, we can see that the scientists have been wrong many times. And just a couple of examples, there's a frog called the batrachian behemoth, what they call now, I think it's called the Goliath frog. And they're up to 10 pounds they get to be. And they were not really documented until 1906. And you go, well, hold on a second. This frog, it's bigger than a German Shepherd. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. And to think that they hadn't noticed it till 1906 is beyond belief. And of course, the other one that people always mention is a fish called the coelacanth. And it's from 450 million years ago. And somebody caught one alive in 1933. So it's kind of like when you think about our ability to discover things, and we actually have a very limited exposure to that stuff because of, you know, classified type of stuff. We actually have an entity of our own people, our own kind, that are meant or trying to suppress this stuff until they have a better understanding of it. But when you think about things, NASA has spent more time exploring outer space than they have even our ocean. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, so we know a little bit more about the immediate out there than we do the right here. So how can we sit here and dismiss some of these creatures as being still here? Right, exactly. And I think you phrased that a great way. And this is going to lead right into our number 6. And if I'm pronouncing this wrong, viewers, please correct me in the comments, because this is one, it's from the Congo River Basin from 1959. It's in Africa, and it's called Mokelele Mbembe. Okay. And what they did was, the first thing, in Africa, there's all kinds of weird creatures, and we've become quite used to them now. But you can imagine the first time someone saw a rhinoceros or a giraffe, they're odd creatures, right? And there was they had heard about this. It's a type of sauropod, not too different than a small brontosaur. I guess supposedly it's 30 to 40 feet. And they went toward one of these indigenous people tribes who they didn't speak English, but they were very knowledgeable. Like all indigenous peoples, they knew tons about their environment, things that you and I have forgotten about the world, right? And they went in to try and find this sauropod. And what they did is they put pictures, they were photographs, and some of them were drawings, up on a bulletin board. And of course, I don't know their words for things, so I'm going to use the English words.
Sure.
But one was, they point to the first one, and the indigenous peoples. I don't think you're supposed to say natives anymore. The indigenous peoples, they pointed to it and they said rhinoceros, and then they pointed to the next one and they said giraffe, and then they pointed to the next one and they said hippopotamus, and then they put up a picture of a sauropod, and all of them went Mokelele Mbembe. In other words, they had seen it. So. There's somebody, they had no reason to lie. Like, it certainly wouldn't have lied about a rhinoceros. So is it true? Is there a sauropod in the African Congo? Maybe there is.
To me, I would very much put it in the classification of being a small brontosaurus, because we have creatures even today, like say either a crocodile or alligator, that continues to grow until it dies. Now, if you want to entertain, let's say, your beliefs, if you're of the Christian faith or anything, that lifespans used to be a lot longer. Now, if you take the same creature and you extend its lifespan the same way that our lives were like hundreds of years in biblical times, if we were to take that same thing and say dinosaurs that were alive and extend their life and they just keep growing like that, who's to say how big they are? And then as people get more and more populous and taking over environments, and even fish, they'll stay a certain size if you put them in a certain tank for the most part. Right. So who's to say this brontosaurus didn't have a lifespan that was cut short and its environment got squashed down and it had to exist in its environment?
I totally agree with you, brother. And one other point, if there was any place in the world where this would have been potentially still undiscovered and possible, it's probably the African Congo, because it's so largely still unexplored.
Now, I think the discovery of this one, I think it lends itself on people wanting to jump on the hoax bandwagon, because then you had a lot of people during that time where dinosaurs got really big for a while. And so it generated that interest, and the hype around Mokelele Mbembe being there and the design of the creature and everything. People automatically jumped on the dinosaur train and they wanted to excuse it, and they go out there. And then I think, if I read correctly or remember correctly, the tribe actually at one point said, no, it's not. And then they kind of dismissed it.
Correct.
And then they brought it back in. So you have to question.
Well, and again, in some of this I might have a little wrong, but my understanding, it was like a British exploration team, right? And once all these photographers, and you can't really blame the indigenous people, they see all these white exploiters, and I don't mean to say explorers, I do mean to say exploiters, because it was, they didn't want them in their neighborhood tearing up their right. So I could understand why they would say, oh no, hey, we were kind of kidding around, pack up your stuff and get lost.
Well, that, and the fact that I think when you get into more indigenous type stuff and even just older cultural things, they wanted to protect their environment, protect the creatures in it. They had a respect for that. And it's another one of those things these days. We are the top of the food chain. We demand that we take what we want, and we, freely expand And I think we don't have as much appreciation, and it might have been a protective measure on their part, and they just used it as like that kind of excuse for a little while until it died down.
Yeah, good call. Good call. Well, without further delay, I'm going to move into number 5. And this is kind of an interesting one. And there's a good bit of controversy about this. So now this is primarily in Puerto Rico, but he is also, or it might be a she, I suppose, turned up in the southwestern United States. And this started in roughly the mid 90s. Of course, I'm talking about our number 5, Chupacabra.
Now, this is one I have to admit, I didn't get a chance to read up on very much. I just understand that the goat sucker portion of it and the fact that it would hang around like people's livestock and stuff. But this one, I'm going to have to turn it over to you, man, because you're going to be more knowledgeable than I am.
Well, and the crazy thing about this one, again, the people who have cited it were not looking for fame. We're not looking to get on YouTube. Again, this is in the 90s, okay? And what was happening, and this is, again, one that's perhaps curiously linked to extraterrestrial behavior. And what I mean by that, the thing that the Chupacabra does is he's almost has like he almost vampire bites these livestock and drains them of blood.
Yeah,
and
no, that's like a vampire
creepy.
Almost, but with different characteristics. Yeah.
Right. And by the way, he's not necessarily a big one, but we used the example of a German Shepherd before, so I'll stick with it. Bigger than a German Shepherd, but smaller than a human. But like, the first example is, and these are primarily rural folks, farmland, and they would come out to, they'd hear some noise and they come out, and here is this weird creature attacking one of their cows, or in this case, it was a lot of goats.
Yeah.
And of course, the creature turns to face him. He's got these burning red eyes, right? And they call the police to come over, and they check on the livestock, which of course is dead now, and they find out that the livestock is in fact drained of blood. And if that's not creepy enough, there are many cases where, and I don't want to turn this into a UFO show. Of course, that's another list, right? But by the way, I'll invite you to that one. We'll do that one next. But the many cases of what they call a cattle mutilation.
Right.
And some of those cases are just really disturbing, because it's not like they find these cattle and they're stabbed or something. They're like surgically operated on and completely drained of blood. And
that's intense.
Yeah, it is just plain weird, right? And if that is in some way linked to the Chupacabra, it seems like they come by it honestly, because I can get why a creature would want to drink the blood of another creature. That's maybe like a vampire bat, or it stays alive.
I was gonna say their main source of nutrition is actually through drinking blood. So a lot of these
makes sense.
Cryptids, they display characteristics that are very real, that make sense why they trigger that fear factor in our brain.
Yeah, and same as the I don't want to do any spoilers because we're coming to some of these on the list, but it's always a situation where there's photographs and they're not too clear and you can't quite tell what's going on. But in almost every the case, the person who cited it was more like, what the F was that? Like, they don't know themselves. And it was kind of the media that came up with Chupacabra, which, as you pointed out, I think it's Spanish for goat sucker. Correct? Yeah.
Well, back in the day, taking photographs, like photography in general has changed so much just even recently. But just to think that if you see something like this, you had to take the camera out, set the lens, wind the film, then take the picture. You're probably not going to get the best picture.
Exactly. And it all makes sense. And again, rewind to the fella from Close Encounters. Hey, plane crashes, there's sometimes 100 a year or something like that. I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me, but there's almost never a picture of a plane crash.
Yeah. It's crazy unless it happens in a populated area, but it's almost like, people that are involved in plane crashes, they tend to steer away from populace, but close enough where they could be rescued. So it's kind of a weird thing that you would think there'd be more. Aircrafts aren't small. They know the projected flight patterns and everything. You'd think the discoverability of them would be even more. So even to take it a step further and to acknowledge how many missing plane crashes there are in a year is a valid point too.
Yeah, I guess it goes back to your theory that, because some of these are, from the 70s through the 90s, some of the more popular ones. And in those days, photography was just a very different animal than now. Now you got hundreds of people with iPhones and, snapping off shots of UFOs and stuff right as they
Yeah.
happen. But it still seems like, even with the poor photography and the potential of being a hoax, these folks who saw it, they still think they saw a cryptid.
Yeah. The diehard, like, total conviction of it, just as anybody else, saw the neighbor's dog, jump over the fence and run away. You cannot unconvince these people.
Yeah. And that brings us to our number 4. And this one's kind of an interesting one to me. This is from Loveland, Ohio, and he was sighted in 1972. This is the Loveland Frog. And I'll see if I can get a graphic up of this character. And this will be tying into our conversation about the hoaxes, right? Which the media right away explained this away. And they still say this now, that it was an overgrown iguana that had gotten loose, which, iguanas can get pretty big.
Yeah, this one's actually fun to me because I actually lived in Loveland, Ohio for
No way.
Yeah, for like 7 years. I lived in Ohio, and
Okay.
so I graduated high school actually in Kings Mills, Ohio, which is just on the other side.
No
And
kidding.
so right in that area, there's Loveland and Mainville and Kings Mills, and there's a big giant like amusement park called Kings Island. That was one of my first jobs at 17 years old. So
Nice.
when
So, well,
you
then
go
let me
through,
ask you, this is great. What is the thought of the community on this sighting?
it was funny because when I found out about this was actually after I moved back to California. Nobody had ever talked about it, but I do remember actually driving past this area where they had this sighting,
Mhm.
like the main sighting. And so I always thought, dude, this would be a perfect spot to kind of pull over. It just gave you a creepy vibe, like right there for no
Yeah,
explained
yeah,
reason.
sure.
So it's like when you're driving along and your radio changes frequencies for a second, or you're walking in the forest and for some reason you feel like somebody's watching you. You also get this, but on a regular basis, where there's something in that area and you kind of get heebie-jeebied out. But a lot of the people don't necessarily talk about it, which is kind of silly to me.
Yeah, it's interesting though. By the way, I didn't know you were originally from Ohio. We're kind of neighbors almost. I'm a Pennsylvania fella. But the original people who cited this thing were, again, they're a group of people that were not trying to get on the news. And they're kind of like an iguana. He said, look, it was standing on its hind 2 legs. It was over 4.5 feet tall. And it
Yeah.
was attacking a dog or something. He's like, I'm telling you, this was no iguana. So it makes you, I understand that people always want to go with, what is it, Occam's razor, which is the most simplistic explanation is usually the correct one.
Yeah.
But in Ohio, an iguana that got to over 4 feet that was walking around on 2 legs, I'm not sure I buy it.
Hey man, you were just talking about a German Shepherd sized bullfrog type of thing that we just found. Who's to say this one wasn't like mid leap that they found? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
So I mean,
sure.
that's a pretty big stretch. I mean, 10 pounds of frog fully stretched out. That's a
Yeah,
good height.
yeah. I saw a photo of one of these frogs, and I mean, the darn thing's like you wouldn't believe it's a frog when you saw it. And it's some of these creatures, again, nature continues to astound. And we talked a little bit about how some of the creatures weren't discovered till later. And there's just numerous cases of this. One of them was the panda, of course. Everybody knows a panda, and they're so cute, and they're in the zoo and everything like that. And of course, the Chinese have been talking about them for centuries.
Yeah.
But the average white citizen was like, what? That's, they're making this up. It's a little bit of an urban legend. And they weren't really fully documented until the 30s. I think it was 1937. Because, of course, at that point, so few people had been to China, and even less into the mountainous, untamed regions of China,
Yeah.
right? So it was like they didn't believe that the panda was a real thing.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, like when all of these things come full circle, and then you people like explain what this is, and so many people, again, so quick to dismiss until they see it themselves.
Yeah.
But yet so many things, whether it's when you hear about a creature that does a certain thing or exists a certain way, I mean, even frogs differ so much from one another, and they're super brutal. If you look at like how they feed, those bigger bullfrogs and stuff eat whole, rats or full whatever gets in their way. And you've even got frogs that break their own bones and use those shards as weapons.
No way.
So they actually stab. Yeah, they'll actually break their own bones if they feel like threatened, and they will use them as weapons. So it's intense. So a frog that's 4 feet tall, I am definitely on the side of like believing it was
Sean.
an animal.
I didn't know that one, and that's amazing. I did know the thing. Aren't frogs the one that if there's no females present, they can change sex so that they can give birth to more frogs?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Again, I might have that wrong. Viewers, I'm not a biologist, but there's one of the species of frogs that it's like an evolutionary defense mechanism that they can change sex on the fly. So if there's not enough to give birth to more frogs, because I'm pretty sure frogs lay eggs.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I mean, they can switch up.
You see it in fish and stuff all the time. So
yeah,
like I said, there's got to be something, and not all fish do it.
Right.
So a certain species makes sense.
Yeah, the power of evolution, man, is just a crazy, crazy thing. It's, life finds a way, as that scientist from Jurassic Park would say.
Right.
Malcolm, right?
Yeah.
And we were talking a little bit about Asia, right? And that's going to blend in here to our number 3, the Yeti. One of my personal favorite cryptids, right? And he's primarily sighted, and by the way, he's got tons of sightings, but they are primarily in the Himalayan mountains, and also there's been quite a few in Siberia and Russia. So, and he's kind of like the what the Western world calls the abominable snowman.
Yeah, yeah. I liked how they depicted him in what is that, Monsters Inc.
Yeah,
just slightly just crazy and just super fun.
Right. He's also in that old Christmas special. I forget the one where they have he's kind of crazy looking. Yeah, he's always like the goofy looking.
Was that the Rudolph one?
Yeah, is it Rudolph, or maybe it's the Year Without a Santa Claus? But
yeah, maybe something like that.
I love those old shows. So,
but yeah, no, I like to think of a Yeti as almost like, I guess like the winterized version of a Bigfoot.
Correct. Yeah, that's you said it before I could. I was going to say the same thing. And again, when you talk about some of the people that have sighted this creature, it's easy to say, oh, well, it's these crazy Russians that have been drinking so much vodka, or well, the northern Chinese people and the Tibetans, they're known for being kind of whacked out, but in fact they're not. And there's been like monks that have seen him, and also these teams of professional mountain climbers, which by the way, these mountain climbers, as you know, they're very well organized and great nutrition, and they're in the peak of their physical, like they're really into mountain climbing.
Yeah, they're in great shape, and they survive crazy stuff that they condition themselves for. So where you and I might have like a hallucinatory effect of lack of oxygen because they're up so high at an elevation, it's different for them because they're used to it.
Totally agree. It kind of ties into where when they talk about the UFO sightings, and I'll just touch on this briefly, but when they say things like, you get an Air Force pilot and they say they saw an unidentified flying object, and this official reply was, well, it was a weather balloon, or it was something, it was a reflection off of Venus. And you go, man, this guy's been flying planes for 21 years. I'm pretty sure he knows what a balloon looks like. Or even worse, when they make the implication that the fellow was on drugs. And it's like, well, so is it one or the other? Either the pilot doesn't know what a balloon looks like, or he's a drug addict. Like either way, the explanation doesn't really
varies.
Yeah.
It's wild variations.
It's the same thing with cryptids, and it makes me wonder why, are they not investigating it enough? Because it's easy to dismiss, because especially when you have like numerous sightings and the descriptions are kind of similar, and we're going to get to that next. Like there must be something to it.
Well, I like to think of it like, I don't know if you've ever seen that show, that Warehouse 13.
I have.
If you haven't seen it, it's like a big warehouse where they keep all of these items that have these otherworldly or supernatural or paranormal abilities. Super cool. And I own the TV series, but if people are familiar with creepypastas, then they're probably also familiar with SCPs.
Oh
So
yeah,
not just
yeah, I'm familiar with that.
so
Sure.
if you take that SCP idea and turn it into a TV show, that's Warehouse 13. So
Oh, I would
and
probably dig this then.
yeah, so I think you'd be really into it. That's just why I mention it.
Yeah, I'll check that out. What's it
But
on?
it's I don't know what I own the actual series, and it
Okay.
wasn't that expensive to get. So I know that you are super into like sci-fi and
I
stuff.
am. I
I
totally
feel
am.
like you
Yeah.
would super dig this because there's history behind
Oh
all
yeah.
these different
Yeah.
things. Like they had like what is that, Elizabeth Bathory's like beauty thing, because
Oh,
it was like a
sure.
compact or something, and
Yeah,
it
yeah.
made people kill, so they had to find this item. um
Yeah.
but super rad like that. But there's government agencies for everything, and ones that we know about, and then they have the super blacklisted ones, I'm sure, that we don't know, the Men in
Nice.
Black, you know what
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean? So like I was saying earlier, the suppression of information, we do it with regular stuff nowadays. Something big is happening over here, and they talk about a misfired firework over here, but they blow it up.
Right. Yeah,
Back.
exactly. Yeah,
We
I
get
totally agree.
distracted so easily nowadays. We have the TikTok, YouTube like mindset where everything is a quick endorphin hit. We want to see what we want right when we want it, and then we get over it.
Yeah, I
So if they
totally
can
agree.
distract for so long and we dive into that, we're not into it until it's over, and then there's no going back. The impact of it has kind of waned itself away.
Yeah, and boy, you make a great point, Sean. And I'll tell you something. When I see the level of, and first, let me tell you, I love conspiracy theories, and I don't necessarily believe them all or anything.
Right.
There's a level of same thing, but there are a couple that sort of make sense, right? And sometimes when you see people that say things like, well, the government would never do that, and like they're following the sort of the corporate line, it's like I want to gently remind them, hold on a second, because I'm a little older. We've caught the government lying to us a number of times. You need to be aware of this. I'm not sure how it got past you, but a number of times. It's not like, well, they did it that one time. Like anytime you look at some of the older conspiracies from the 30s, 40s, 50s, man, by 60, 70, 80, we found out that they had come true.
Well, I mean, going back even to the aliens thing, wasn't it just like this past year where a bunch of documentation or
Yeah.
something was released?
Yeah.
I mean, after years and years and years of saying, no, Area 51, whatever.
Right. Turns out it's all real.
Yeah. And then they're like, okay, now you can have it.
And by the way, you mentioned the Warehouse 13. If you're a reading type, there's a great book that came out by a UFO researcher. His name's Timothy Good, and it's called Above Top Secret. And all the book is, it is declassified Air Force documents, because after a certain number of years, they have to release it, you see.
Right.
And man, it'll send chills up your spine, because these are guys that are Air Force pilots, airport employees, like people that know better. And they tell their stories, and you go, come on, there's no way this is true. And then you realize that the government censored it for, it's all of them are at least 25 years it was censored for.
Well, I think it's kind of fun to realize that the information isn't discovered except for the people that are seeking to find it. So if we keep ourselves busy in another area, so any of these things that we get, revealed to us through any type of media, it's because somebody is dedicated to that. And I think that is so rad.
Yeah. And man, again, you had a great point about the distraction. I totally believe that is the case. So I tell you what, let's launch into our number 2 here. This is one of my all-time favorites. We're getting to the big ones now, right? So number 2, this is, and also I want to hear your opinion about whether you think this is a hoax or not, because there's many on each side of the fence for this one. Of course, I'm talking about this is in the Scottish Highlands. That's the Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah, no, I like the Loch Ness Monster, and I like the fact, just like Mokelele Bay being not one that is going after flesh or being violent or anything else, but maybe like an herbivore. So a more they exist because they exist. They're not made to instill fear. These are just, they exist. And this is one of those where if you can accept, Mokelele Bay being a small brontosaurus, probably the same thing here with the aquatic type of dinosaurs and stuff. So I still think that that's very much a possibility as well. Yeah, I think that there's dinosaurs out there. Come on.
And there's a lot of science that suggests, And I guess that the Scottish lochs are very thick with a material like a peat, so that it's very the water, like it's not very clear water is what I'm getting, and it's a very muddy type of water. And they say that it turns out that the lochs themselves, not only is the water deep, but several of them are connected with sort of like tunnels underneath. So it would be very easy to surface in one spot and then submerge and come up somewhere quite far away, even potentially hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, potentially, right?
Well, those lochs themselves, I mean, they've given birth to more than one cryptid. I mean, I know, even just to reference, I know it's not on the list, but the Kelpie exists. And so one of the creatures in my book is a Kelpie.
No kidding.
And so that's kind of a fun thing. So that's where this would tie in. But like an aquatic horse that exists in these lochs in Ireland and Scotland.
Yeah.
And who's to say that what is in that biome doesn't have an effect on what's in there? You know what I mean?
Sure. And you make another great point, Sean, which is that there's one for each country, pretty much. Japan has one. There's the Lake Champlain monster. There's a Ogopogo, right? There's I'll get a few graphics up for the viewers, but there's pretty much one for each country of varying sizes. The Loch Ness is kind of like the premier one, and that's for a couple of reasons. And I will show some graphics for this. For example, the most famous one is what they call the surgeon's photo, which I believe is from 1933. And it's what most of us would imagine when we see the Loch Ness monster, which is kind of a blurry photo, of him coming up out of the water. And that guy swore till his deathbed that, hey, this is real, that's not a hoax. And even a couple of years ago, there was some guys that claimed, well, it was a hoax and the whole thing. Like, there's always some disagreement as to whether it was a hoax or not. I kind of believe that one wasn't a hoax. And my this is, again, one man's opinion. I'd like to hear yours. But
no, I agree, man.
Like, why would you fake it? What in 1933, and you're a surgeon, why would you say, hey, well, I'm on vacation with my wife, I'll make this hoax photo?
And it doesn't have anything to do with your position in life. It doesn't have anything to do with your interest as being a surgeon. Right. You're just out doing your own thing.
Yeah,
and
they were on vacation or something, right?
Yeah.
And even if you go back, there was the Loch Ness monster. And I said we were going to focus from 1900 on, and since he made it because of the 1933 photo. But if you go back to, this is the 6th century AD, there was an Irish monk by the name of Saint Columba. Do you know about this?
I don't.
It was, and he had an encounter with this, what he called a water creature, and he wrote it all down, and it was in Loch Ness. And he's the one that says something like, think not to touch thou that man. And because I guess the Loch Ness monster was going to attack a man, and they were on some kind of fishing boat. But man, it's 585 AD, I think it was. So again, when you go back that far, why would you make that up?
Well, I mean, yeah, when you go into this stuff, even in thinking of, when people are trying to explain things away, well, if it exists over there, how come it's not everywhere? And I think you kind of have to go with the fact that the only way that we get a lot of the other, like, pandas and stuff, we bring them over. Like, we as humans are mobile. We created vessels to span these great distances and everything. So when Pangea broke apart, and these creatures had to adapt and survive where they are, who's to say your Yeti isn't like a northern Bigfoot, just of a different region, just like you have your black bear, your brown bear, and then your polar bear. They all blend into their surroundings. So you have that. So the same thing to do with Mokelele Bay, with it being a land kind of creature, and then of course Loch Ness being the aquatic version, more or less, of that. Not seeing enough to say whether or not it was with flippers or whether it's just that's what you see, but it's kind of an entertaining idea.
It's a great analogy. I think you're onto something. It's a great analogy. And with that, it's going to lead right into our number one. Are you ready for this one? And this is one of the ones I'm passionate about. And again, shrouded in mystery over the years, and also whether is it a hoax or isn't it? And you're going to see plenty of folks on either side. Indigenous peoples have been talking about this creature for years, and it wasn't really until the 1900s when it entered the public consciousness. I'm talking about our number one. He's Bigfoot.
Bigfoot is I think by far, it is way popular, and it's still relevant, I think, even today, with people having sightings and people going on their Bigfoot hunts and
Yeah,
different
yeah.
things like that, and the impact that it has even today. My girlfriend is native, and her dad consumed so much Bigfoot, anything. Even when I went to the Dollar Tree and picked up this dollar bargain bin Bigfoot movie, he was into it. But and it's so cool to see the effect that it has, just even now. But yeah,
Hmm.
Bigfoot's super huge, and I know that one's gone back and forth between being
Hoax or not?
real, being hoax,
Yeah, yeah.
and I think a lot of that has to do with people wanting to be famous because of the recognition that the discovery or the introduction of the photograph um, made on people. And so you have this mix of people that maybe had real sightings with the people trying to take advantage of it. I think that exists all across, whether we go back to even aliens or Bigfoot or whatever.
Well, Shaun, I'm going to pin you down here. In your opinion, Bigfoot, hoax or not?
No, I believe it. I
Yeah.
believe it just like I believe the Yeti. Like I said, it's just a regional Bigfoot. I definitely am on board with it 100%. And the fact that it could be self-aware enough, and if it, like, our senses are a result of our surroundings and what we do every day,
Right.
so people that live at higher elevation, they breathe a much richer oxygen, they function different than the people like myself that are more on sea level. So how would this creature be in the wild just naturally? It's going to be more aware, it's going to be more elusive, and probably wants nothing to do with it on some base. And let's say on a very mentally or self-aware type of situation where a monkey is aware of itself, maybe this is the bridge between monkey and man, to say that he's self-aware but not aware enough that he wants to be part of the show. He likes his seclusion.
Or phrased another way, and I'm going to go out on a limb here because as you know, I'm a huge cryptid fan, and you are too. I'm also a huge UFO fan, and of all the cryptids we mentioned, none are more linked to UFO sightings than Bigfoot. And I realize that sounds like a little bit of a kooky statement. I know the way it sounds, but if you take a minute and Google, there is almost always in a Bigfoot sighting a rash of UFO sightings in the area, to the extent where people that you research these things sometimes ask the people around, hey, by any chance, was there a, you know what I mean? Because it's so common.
Really, I
And
didn't
there's,
actually know that.
yeah, it's what they call a flap, and usually a Bigfoot sighting has a UFO flap, and maybe not right
Oh,
over his head or anything, but like in the neighboring county. And there was even a couple of some of the Bigfoot sighting incidents sound a little crazy, and I'll rewind just a hair. The first thing is the most credible of the sightings is likely the indigenous peoples, right? The Sasquatch,
yeah.
they call it. And because they have a way of describing it that doesn't really have any fear. It's real more like a, and again, it's not like a worship or anything, but they respect the creature, but he's just part of their environment.
Yeah.
But then you get into the 1900s, and there's been there's numerous sightings of Bigfoot accompanied by these UFOs. And some he even has, and I didn't put this in my book because it's a little bit more of the obscure ones, but sometimes he even has the Nords with him, which is the sub race of the Bigfoot race. Have you ever heard about any of that? They're like
Uh,
Scandinavian looking, they look like humans, and they're long blonde hair, and they're wearing like what you and I would call a spacesuit, and they're with Bigfoot. They're almost like his Men in Black.
no, I never even heard of that before.
Yeah, and there's something, when I say a lot, there might be 4 or 5 of those. But when you talk to more than one person that says something like, well, not only did I
Yeah.
see this ape-like creature, but he had these 2 blonde fellas with him. You go, wait a minute, what? Like, it's so outlandish that people immediately discount it. But it's happened more than one time. It's like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, no, and I think too the characteristics of them, you have to take into consideration what is the trajectory of the cryptids that are being described. And I love the fact that you can come across stories where they are protective of wildlife and protective of their environment,
Right.
and maybe has saved somebody from something. And I think that is a really cool, like, type of thing to kind of lean into, because in my mind I almost equate it in the comic book equivalent to like the Swamp Thing of the forest.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. By the way, I got to ask you, are you a Swamp Thing fan?
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, dude, me too,
I've got
totally.
that. I've got the series that they did
Yeah,
on HBO. I think it was on my wall
yeah.
too.
I might be I'm probably in the top 10 Swamp Thing fans in the world. I'm a huge Swamp Thing nerd. I like swamp creatures in general. Like I like Man Thing and the
Yeah.
Heap and all the crazy swamp creatures. But yeah, that's a good comparison. There's been a number of Bigfoot encounters. Like we're going to talk a little bit about the encounters. In 1924, there was one called the Ape Canyon incident. And that was, again, one where it was a group of mining guys got into an exchange with a group of Bigfoots, big feet.
Big feet.
And again, they were shooting at them. Right. And anytime this is, again, my opinion, where you get into a situation where the guys are firing on something, those people are afraid and something's wrong. It isn't like, oh, I saw something weird. It's I'm scared out of my mind and I'm shooting at it. That was in
And it's more than
1924.
one.
Yeah, a group. And there was another one too. And this was the story came out in 1974. And this is one of the least credible stories, but we're sharing some of the things. And this happened in British Columbia in the 20s. And this fella claimed that he was kidnapped from the woods by a family of Bigfoot creatures. And there was a male, a female, and two children, a male and female Bigfoot child. And again, I realize it sounds super kooky, but why tell a story like this? It's not, what do you have to gain from it other than everybody thinking you're absolutely a nut job?
Yeah, especially if you have that level of conviction that you place yourself so far into that wheelhouse you cannot pull out. I think with stuff like that nowadays, especially as you go back in time where people were more and more susceptible to putting people in institutions and madhouses because of things like this,
Right.
there has to be some level of credibility to keep them out of that, so that there was enough there that people were like, oh, okay, but
yeah, or to tie into what you said earlier, some type of psychic connection to the culture, the psychology of it. Like things don't happen in a vacuum. There's something to it. You don't just come up with something like that out of the blue, right? And
right.
I had one more thing I wanted to add about the Bigfoot, because we're primarily talking about the encounters tonight, and probably the best known one and the best piece of evidence, and I'll show a little bit of a clip of it, which is, and I think this is what most of our viewers would think of when they think of a Bigfoot sighting, which is called the Patterson-Gimlin film. And what it is, it's like 6-7 seconds of film. And allegedly what it shows is these two men were on horseback and they were out behind his ranch or something. And he had what was a relatively new technology at the time, which was a video camera. And the horse was spooking and rearing, and he pulled the camera up. And what does the camera get but a couple of seconds of an ape-like creature passing through the scene? You know which one I mean, right?
Right, absolutely. It's the famous one where he's passing by like the log or whatever.
Right. And yeah, exactly. And I don't know. And by the way, again, this is a hotly debated one.
I think that's what they were saying, is they thought that it was a female.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
So wow. When I was going through our list and stuff, I was looking at stuff, and I think what one or two of them that I was coming across was saying that they believed it was a female.
I guess that is right, because there's like breasts kind of.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. Sean, I didn't know that. Yeah,
so I thought that was kind of neat.
That is really cool. And
which in a lot of wildlife, I mean, the females are the hunters. Yeah. So like with lions and stuff, and the males will be the protective ones, but the females will be hunters. So it kind of makes sense that this female may be out and about if they carry on a similar type of familial structure where the female is the hunter and goes out and is more of the explorer, where the male kind of takes care of things back at the home camp, so to speak.
Yeah, interesting, man. I know that and by the way, this film in itself, that is probably the most hotly debated piece of hoax material, because I guess it was two men, and I might have this a little wrong, but it's something to the effect of, the one guy was saying, hey, this was a hoax, we put it all on. But guy number one, Patterson, he went to his deathbed claiming, hey, this was real, I saw something, I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And it makes you ask the question, well, if it was a hoax, surely you'd give it up before you died, right? I think I probably would.
Yeah, because a lot of people, that's the only time that they actually release their demons, so to speak. and they confess all of their sins. But yeah, so I would lead into the fact that it would be a more believable thing, especially because once it started to be accepted, you know, the other stories and other things that would come out, or people making connections even across the entire nation of their sightings. You know what I mean? So the similarities and the comparisons, and how it inspired so many people to come around and try, and it generated its own little community of people. And I think that is so huge, because who's to say that it was maybe, whereas Loch Ness would be more of an endangered cryptid, where Bigfoot actually has a more numerous existence.
Well, and I've read a couple of accounts, and by the way, I want to recommend this book again. It's called Above Top Secret. And they always make some connections between, we tend to look at Bigfoot and say, oh, ape-like creature, it's some kind of primitive creature. But the theory that they were putting forth is that the reason why we don't often see him and can't find a body and can't quite understand it is because Bigfoot is actually a more advanced creature than us. And can conceal his existence, and that it is fully intentional, and that is why he's sometimes cited around UFOs and this kind of thing. And I thought that was a fascinating theory, because it kind of shows bias, right? Because we look at something and say, well, it looks like a gorilla, so it's not as smart as us. But in reality, if that was an extraterrestrial, I'm just saying, for example, why wouldn't it be more intelligent than us? Having hair on your body isn't necessarily, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that, and like you said, maybe who's to say that it's that the fur on it is necessarily part of the creature itself, rather than some sort of a disguise that gives humans enough of a maybe it's this that they excuse it. And a lot of times, us as people, we see what we want to see, you know, and we also have the ability to put our remote control to our TV down right in front of us, and then it disappears on us and we can't find it for like an hour or two. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
So
sure.
we have that ability to ghost our own vision, and sometimes we see things out of the corner of our eyes that don't make sense, whether it be shadow people or aliens or cryptids or whatever. But those windows of opportunity to be able to perceive more than what we would normally, I think, happen just as much as it happens with us dismissing the things that we know are right in front of us.
That's interesting. Interesting, man. Well, Shaun, I got to tell you, this was a terrific list, and I really had fun talking about this. I really appreciate your viewpoints, and I thought you had some terrific theories. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
And I want to tell our viewers, if you like this kind of material, I really think you're going to dig Shaun's new book. This is, well, first, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about it.
Sure, go ahead.
We both love this kind of material. And before we went too far into talking about it, I'd like you, can you tell us a little bit about your creative team that you worked with on this book?
Yeah, so I'd like to give credit, obviously, to the creator of I Drive for Cerber. Their name is Mofucius. And it's funny because nobody, except for a few people, know what or who they are. And so we've gone with the like a skinwalker type of ideal for who they are. But Mofucius is the creator and wrote the prose version of the story. And from that, it progressed itself into a narrative format done by a gentleman by the name of Scott Pye, who goes by Nature's Temper on YouTube. He does a lot of creepypasta narrations and stuff, but he also lent his vocal talents and stuff of I Drive for Cerber to the audio version of the comic book. And so that brings me to Kyron Silva, who did the pencils for the book.
I know Kyron a little bit. He's a good guy.
He's an excellent guy. He is an inspiration to me. And he just is really, really supportive. And so I definitely wanted to have him on this book because I felt like his art style spoke to the way that it was presented. And after talking to Mofucius, the way that they wanted to represent the story.
Yeah. So he's doing the art.
Yeah. So he did all of the pencils for it.
Gotcha.
I myself did the inks. We do have an alternate cover done by Mark Zuptich, who is a gentleman that I've been friends with since high school. and I actually was part of my first comic book on his team, which is super rad to be able to bring him onto a book for me. And then the colors for the main cover was Chris Hall, and he's been well represented out there. He's done a lot of work for Ebon Press, I think.
Okay.
And then we also have Robin Jones, who is our letterer, and he has done, I think he's done lettering and stuff for Image and stuff. Forgive me if I'm misspeaking, but I believe it was, I know he's done it for one of the big publishing things. So it's an honor to have him on board. And now we have Kenny Aitken on board as our colorist for the interiors of the book. And I couldn't be more pleased.
Awesome. It sounds like you got a killer team, man.
Really. And, thinking, things happen for a reason, just like people see these cryptids, then there's no explanation. The way that this team kind of came together really has no explanation, because not only does Mofucius, I did the research to find out who they actually really were.
Yeah.
Turns out Mofucius, myself, Kyron, and Kenny all live within about an hour of each other.
Oh, no kidding.
And that hardly ever happens. And that's just how it worked out.
Yeah, wow, that is pretty amazing. And do I remember correctly, you're Californian?
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
I'm in way super north, even more north than Sacramento.
Gotcha. Well, I've seen some of the previews, and the book sounds terrific. Can you tell us a little bit about who would you say your target audience is for this project?
I would say like anybody that enjoys like horror and maybe some murder mystery type elements. Okay. And I did dial back some of the language to broaden the age of people that are into it, because I know that creepypastas are popular during like the teenager phase, I guess, of growth and interest because of the short story presentation. And so I opened that up by limiting some of that, but it's definitely there for a wide variety. So if you enjoy supernatural, if you enjoy like grim fairy tales type stuff, and obviously cryptids, because we do have a gentleman by the name of Ray, and I say gentleman because he is what looks to be, nobody's quite sure, to be like Slenderman.
Ah, okay,
and
sure.
So I did mention before, we do have a Kelpie in the book, but we also have an ogre by the name of Borg, who believes that he's an orc, which he has to be told numerous times that orcs aren't real. They're just part of Tolkien's story. Yeah. So it's kind of a fun thing when you think you have to convince this being or creature that what it's trying to think of itself as doesn't exist.
Well, and I want to make a quick comment too. I've been seeing some of the previews, and I'm a fan of the interstitial materials for books, and I like to do a lot of that in my books. And I thought you did something that was really cool here, and I'm going to share some of this with the viewers, which is they have sort of like it looks like an ad campaign. It's like a corporate ad campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so a lot of times with creepypastas, they're like I said, they're short stories that are meant to kind of disturb you a little bit, but the presentation in a lot of them is if it's a first person encounter. The story of I Drive for Cerber is told from Jim's perspective as if he was real, and this is a real thing that he just happened to come across. He was out of a job, he was scrolling for work, and he came across an ad. He applied for it, got hired, and he finds out that it's for these cryptids and creatures from the paranormal and supernormal, like supernatural existence. And so it was just really fun to commit myself to that, I guess the following that already existed, where it was a real business. It already has fan art, it already has fan fiction, it has what they call the worst verse now. Yeah. And so there's also spin-off stories that other people write for this, such as I Ride for Cerber, and werewolves are, pardon the language, werewolves are assholes. So, sure. But they're a lot of fun, but they are all presented as if it could be like a real thing that people are just dismissing. Yeah. So I wanted to lean into that. How would that ad look? How would it go? And so I created some of these ads that present themselves as if it's a legitimate business, but there's something a little bit off in each one of them. And I did one for people that want to be drivers. I also did a couple of the passenger versions of these commercials, and a whole slew of just regular campaign images that have things like Bigfoot or Slenderman or
cool.
like a Jekyll and Hyde type element to it.
Yeah.
And those were real fun to lean into.
I think you guys did a great job with that. It's very memorable, and I definitely noticed it. And man, I want to say I wish you all the luck with the campaign. It sounds like a terrific project.
Well, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, and one last thing, where can we find you?
You can find me as Shaun Barbour on Facebook. You can find me as Instinct on TikTok. You can find me Instinct Comics on Twitter and Instagram. So, and I also have my own web store. Again, that's just instinctcomics.com. And if they're interested in the campaign that exists right now for iDrive for Cerber, the easiest way to look that up is cerbercomic.com. So super easy.
Perfect. So viewers, please take a look at iDrive for Cerber from Shaun Barbour. Shaun, I just got to say, thanks for coming on the show, man. This was really a fun one. I really enjoyed this. So I'm really grateful that you came.
No, man, like I said, I've been kind of looking forward to it too. Just the different types of like being able to communicate and talk with people. It's one of the things I love about conventions. It's one of the things I love about this, and the fact that going into this with you, having that layout, having something to dive into and really kind of inspire. Your list inspired me to go in and just reinvigorate myself over all these things that are already an interest and just be excited about it.
Well, I can really feel the enthusiasm for the project, and I think that the readers will feel it too. So I hope you guys will check it out. I want to say thanks to the viewers out there. I appreciate you tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Good night, everybody.